Welcome to No Rares Required, episode 37, Izzet Spellslinger. This has been my favorite archetype to play in Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. I've trophied with the deck running just 2 creature spells, and I finished my best of 1 ladder climb with an Izzet deck to hit Mythic number 158 with a pile that had 4 birthday escapes. Many of the blue commons go late, and Izzet, as well as Amir, or blue-black, really look to leverage the ring temptation and card draw available in blue. Once again, I'm including my draft skeleton before I dive into the cards individually to help give you an overall sense of the archetype. The draft skeleton includes 3 creature spells, Pelagir, Survivor, and Bilbo, Retired Burglar. It might seem insane, but this deck can close out with 1/1s from Quarrel's End, an Unmasked token off Deceive the Messenger, or a 1/1 token off Rally at the Hornburg. The fact that level 4 ring bearers are skulking looters that deal 4 damage goes a long way, and is why Fear Fire Foes, the red heat ray that also deals 1 damage to your opponent's board, and to a lesser extent Black Breath, the black sorcery that gives -1/-1 to your opponent's board, have been good inclusions. For this strategy to work though, you absolutely need to get to the 4th level ring emblem, so I aim to have a bare minimum of 7 cards that tempt, but the more the merrier. And to be fair, this is a bit of a dream curve, but it does showcase a couple of things. I like to be mostly blue in this archetype, especially because of the double pip on Lorien Revealed, the 5-cost blue land cycler at common that you can cast for 5 to draw 3 cards. Don't be afraid to have a very low creature count, but I do try to have around at least 10 cards that put something like a 1/1 token on the board. And since I get a lot of questions about mana bases, I'd like to quickly touch on a couple of things. I think the card draw from cards like Quarrel's End, Lorien Revealed, Arwen's Gift, you can shave a land if you have at least 3 cards that draw. And then since the rest of your curve is so low if you don't count the land cycler, I also think you can substitute a land for the land cycler. So for this skeleton, this would be a 15 lander. Maybe I'll make an episode on land count and mana curve at some point, but keep in mind that Best of 1 has a hand smoother, so what you might get away with or get to work in Best of 1 won't work the same in Best of 3. And since I'm an old Magic player, I tend to lean towards being on the higher end of lands and build curves that work based off of calculations that don't account for the hand smoother. Which works well in this set, since you have looting off of Ring Temptation, you can get rid of extra lands later in the game, and I prefer to flood rather than get stuck on a low mana count. That said, the general strategy I've been using is cheap blue spells that cycle, play a large number of spells to control your opponent, and ultimately increase the damage off of something like Gandalf Sanctification, or ping them for 2 damage with Fiery Inscription, and then finish them off with unblockable 1/1s that deal 4 damage. Easy trophy. Now let's dive into the cards individually and discuss some alternate cards and alternative strategies available for Izzet. Izzet gets a Mythic level common. Rally at the Hornburg is great in every red deck, whether you are playing it as a 2/2 haste on turn 2, using it to trigger humans entering the battlefield in Boros, or using it to give you 2 chump blockers late in the game. This card has been absolutely amazing. In Izzet though, it's just 1 step better. It's a spell for cards like Gandalf Sanctification and Fiery Inscription, and the 1/1s make excellent ring bearers. I still see this card around pick 5 or 6, and it's wonderful because I'm happy to pick 1 this if I know I'm in Izzet. It's also it's the best play before a turn 3 Horn of Gondor if you happen to have that busted card in your deck. My tier 1 common is Birthday Escape, a cheap spell that cycles and has tempt. What more could you want? I will run as many of these as I can grab. Also, strangely available around pick 5 or 6, despite being an easy inclusion in every blue deck, except maybe the scry-heavy Simic deck. At tier 2 we have Lorien Revealed. In my opinion, it is filler in the other blue archetypes, so I like to use this as one of my signals that Izzet is open. The flexibility of counting this as a tap land in your opening hand or a late game card to draw into more action has played out very well, and it often feels that if you can cast this without falling too far behind on the board, the game is yours. And they can go quite late, around pick 6 or 7. I still only want to run 1 or 2, because in general I try to keep my curve low in this archetype. Also at tier 1 we have Soothing of Smeagol. If you care about Ring Tempt, so Izzet and Azorius, then you want this card. It can backfire a little bit in certain matchups. Boros and Rakdos both have a fair number of cards that do things on Enter the Battlefield that you don't necessarily want to trigger again, and sometimes your opponent is just amassing a large army that this can't touch. So I limit myself to 1 or 2. These also are available late, around pick 7 or 8, but I imagine that will shift as more people figure out how good blue is as a color. My other tier 1 red common is Quarrel's End. I've run up to 4 of this card in Izzet. I think that was a bit too much, but it triggers card draw, and it filters out useless lands late in the game and creates a 1/1 as a ring bearer. All things that Izzet wants to do. And it also goes late, around pick 7 or 8. So my first 5 commons all go average to late in their pick order, and is partly why I end up in this archetype as much as I do. Now for tier 3. I've really enjoyed Deceive the Messenger. It opens up some really fun lines, like targeting your own ring bearer so it can't be blocked, and then turning it into a 2/5 with Dreadful as the Storm to hit for lethal. The archetype also needs things to slow down your opponent, and it has been an okay retort to your opponent playing Rally at the Hornburg on turn 2. The card is often available on the wheel, so the question is more about how many to play, and I think like most 1-drops, the answer is around 2. Also at tier 3 we have Glorious Gale. My approach to Izzet isn't as controlling as my approach to Dimir, blue-black, or Azorius, white-blue, but I've still been happy to hold up Glorious Gale, especially to hit my opponent's turn 4, since that tends to be the sweet spot tempo-wise, but sometimes you have to counter their turn 2 or turn 3 play just to survive before you can get to your card draw. Dreadful as the Storm I also put at tier 3. This is also a decent signal, since its best archetype is Izzet, and it should wheel. Functionally a burn spell if you have an unblocked 1/1, and as I mentioned with Deceive the Messenger, it can be used to get surprising lethal turns, especially since it tempts as well, so you can hit that 4th level ring emblem and hit for an additional 3 damage. I usually aim to include 1 or 2 in my deck. Hithlean Knots is also a good signal card since it is filler to bad filler and the other blue archetypes. This is also a card I will try to wheel. It's a cheap blue spell that scries for 1, taps a creature, and draws a card. I have a little bit of magic trauma around this card because I forgot to tap my opponent's lethal attacker in Wizard 138's limited tournament Wiz Cup. Just don't forget to tap before passing to attackers. Smite the Deathless I also put at tier 3. I really want my answers to my opponent's board in Rakdos and Gruul, where I put this at a higher tier, since Izzet can usually get away with minimal interaction. By having 1 or 2 smites for your opponent's game-winning threats like Faramir, Prince of Athelian, or Witch King can come in handy. As premium early removal though, you'll have to take it early. And my last common worth the spotlight is Relentless Rohirrim. You want at least 7 ways to tempt, but if you can get there, then Relentless Rohirrim is worth playing. I'll briefly mention a couple of commons that didn't quite make the cut. Pelargir Survivor, which I included in my draft skeleton, is great if you don't have enough Rally at the Hornburgs and Deceive the Messengers or Glorious Gales to slow your opponent's early game down, and the 1/3 body makes a very good ring bearer. Isolation at Orthanc is an okay alternative if you are lacking spot removal or answers to big threats. Arwen's Gift is okay if you are missing Quarrel's End and Lorien Revealed for card draw, and Improvised Club can be a decent one-of since it's great in the mirror match for fizzling your opponent's Gandalf Sanctions, but just remember that your 1/1s are pretty valuable in this archetype. And then Breaking of the Fellowship is a decent interaction if you are low on ring temptations, and Rohirrim Lancer is a great ring bearer and goes quite nicely with Birthday Escape. Now for the uncommons. Izzet gets 3 mythic level uncommons. First up, we have Amir of the Rittermark. This is an easy pack 1 pick 1 since it is absolutely busted in every red archetype, and in Izzet you can make that 1/1 a lethal threat instead of just a chump blocker. This card demands an answer and can quickly swing the game in your favor. Sarumans Trickery is my mythic level uncommon number 2. The cancel of the set is usually just mid, but countering your opponent's play and getting a 1/1 puts this over the top, especially in an archetype that can make the 1/1 into a lethal threat. Don't sleep on how good this card is. It's an easy pack 1 pick 1, and I wish that I get to see it more often. And the third mythic level uncommon and easy pack 1 pick 1 is Fear Fire Foes, FFF for short. FFF is often a 2-for-1 and sometimes a complete wrath for your opponent's board. I've trophied every time that I've had the opportunity to run 2 of these in a deck, and I often chant, please don't have Fear Fire Foes when it's my opponent's turn, especially in this archetype where your 1/1s are so valuable. At tier 1 we have Horses of Brunn. These go super late for an uncommon, around pick 5 or 6, and I don't understand why. Partly why I put Isolation of Orthanc so low is that this is my preferred spot removal. For 1 more mana, albeit double pip blue, you get to bounce 2 things to their hand, scry 1, and it triggers a ring tempt. I've been able to get 2 copies of this in my deck more often than I feel is fair, and it bounces amass tokens. Bye bye huge orc army, please come again. Ranger's Firebrand, I also put at tier 1. You need your 1/1s to get through, and this is great at removing something that is standing in the way of your mighty 1/1 ring bearer. It also triggers a tempt if they removed your early ring bearer, and this one is a little more easy to see why you'd want it in your list, so it tends to be gone by pick 2 or 3. Bilbo, Retired Burglar, one of the signpost uncommons for Izzet. If you see Bilbo pick 4 or later, it's a good signal that Izzet is open. One thing I guess I should mention is that since Dimir, blue-black, is also a very spell-heavy archetype, you can have some success with Grixis or blue-black-red, especially since Pelargir Survivor, the 1/3 for 2 that didn't quite make the list, can tap for any color to cast an instant or sorcery. Bilbo creates a treasure whenever he deals combat damage to a player, and you have decent splash options like Wizard's Rockets or Swarming of Moria, which also creates a treasure token. Something to keep in mind, especially if you pivoted into Izzet after Black felt too contested, and you have cards like Bitter Downfall or maybe Golem's Bite. I prefer to be strictly 2 colors if I can keep Black in... I prefer to be strictly 2 colors if I can, but keep Black in mind specifically if you are looking to splash. If you do go the Grixis path, Troll of Khazad-dûn becomes a very interesting card, as Sam Black mentioned in his podcast Drafting Archetypes, less so as mana fixing, but if you already have a reason to be blue-black-red, it's a great threat that also counts as a swamp. Just something to keep in mind. At tier 2, we have the Bath Song. Good card draw and filtering for 2 turns, and then the 3rd chapter lets you shuffle your game-winning spells back into the library. I've seen a couple of players mess this up by shuffling way too many cards back into their library. I have played 350 games in this format, and only once was I at risk of mill, and that was because I had Palantir and was doing it to myself. You want a high spell count in your graveyard for Gandalf Sanction, and really you just want to play your broken spells again like Fear Fire Foes, so be selective on what you put back. Grishnak, Brash Instigator, I also put at tier 2. You don't have a lot of amass synergies, but the Steal and Sack mechanic isn't just a Rakdos thing in this set. All you need is a couple improvised clubs if you really want to do it. But simply taking something that's blocking your ring bearer for a turn while also giving you 2 bodies to gum up the board or attack as future ring bearers has been great. Fae of Orcs also works quite well even without amass synergies. It's a superstar in Rakdos, but in Izzet I still put it at tier 2. Being able to remove the small blockers that are blocking your ring bearer is important, and with Deceive the Messenger or Grishnak, you can sometimes even snag a 3 toughness creature like Protector of Gondor. Usually it's best to clear the path for your ring bearers though, I can't stress that enough. Ring Temptation and 1/1s is the key. Everything else is secondary. My last Tier 2 uncommon is Gandalf Sanctification. With how much I've mentioned this card throughout this episode, you'd think it would be the #1 uncommon. In all reality, it's a great card, but a percentage of the time your opponent is able to cast Improvised Club or Nasty End and fizzle your spell. And it can be a dead card in your hand until you get enough spells into your graveyard. And not to sound like a broken record, but the 4th level Ring Bearers can close out the game on their own. So you don't even need it as a win condition. Don't get me wrong though, it's still a super satisfying card to play to finish off a creature at 1 life after combat, or just shoot a 1/1 outright and hit them for 10 plus damage, and I'll happily include as many as I can. At Tier 3 we have Fiery Inscription, the card that I was most excited to play before the set came out, and it hasn't been a disappointment. Fiery Inscription has been a lot of fun since it makes all of those cheap blue spells that cycle also ping for 2 damage. It also triggers a Ring Temptation. It's a bit of a balancing act since taking turn 3 off from developing the board has a real cost, but as long as you have ample card draw in your deck, you can usually make it back. Bitter Downfall I also put at Tier 3 for those who have decided to splash for black. Castable off of Pelargir Survivor and treasure tokens from Bilbo. Sometimes the splash is completely free, and that's when I'm most interested in playing off-color cards, but I've seen several other players have quite a bit of success just being straight 3-color Grixis, so keep this card in mind, specifically if you do decide to splash a 3rd color. My last Tier 3 uncommon is also a splash. The Mouth of Sauron can work quite well. Similar to Bitter Downfall, I think it's a great card to include if you are already deciding to splash black. Not really a reason to look to splash, but sometimes the splash is free, and it has great synergies with a deck that aims to get 10 plus spells into your graveyard relatively quickly. Now for the rares. As always, we'll start with the honorable mention to Horn of Gondor. Busted card. Play it when you open it. Rangers of Athelian is the top performing blue rare, and Izzet is no exception. I put it at Tier 1. Similar to Grishnak, it helps get things that can block your ring bearers out of the way, but it doesn't just do it for 1 turn, and it comes with a Ring Temptation. Do note that if they remove the creature that you aim to mind control with Improvised Club or Nasty End, it prevents the ring trigger, since the "then the ring tempts you" wording means that the other effect has to resolve, but you can choose to not mind control a creature if the ring tempt gives you lethal. You can just click Submit 0. Faramir, Prince of Athelian, is worth splashing if you are in blue or white. It is one of the best rares in the set that you should try to play as often as you can. I put him at Tier 2 in Izzet. Scroll of Isildur I put at Tier 3, but its best archetype is Izzet. Sometimes you get to take a Horn of Gondor or Andoril, Flame of the West, or Palantir, but even if your opponent doesn't have a busted artifact, it at least still triggers a Ring Tempt. Then you get to tap 2 of your opponent's creatures and put a stun counter on them, and then draw a card for each tapped creature your opponent controls. Something to keep in mind is if you have Hithlean Knots, you might want to put a stop on your upkeep so that you can get an additional card draw by tapping one of their creatures. And now for the mythics. As always, Andoril, Flame of the West, and Palantir of Orthanc are amazing, and you should play them if you open them. Izzet has but one mythic that stands out specifically for the archetype, and that is Sauron the Dark Lord. I put it at Tier 2. I think it is much more difficult to splash in Rakdos, Black-Red, and Dimir, Blue-Black, so the time that I'm going to play Sauron is in Izzet. That being said, its cost isn't really what I'm aiming to do, curve-wise, and neither is Amass. But being able to discard your hand and draw 4 cards each time the ring tempts you is amazing. Thank you for joining me as I nerd out about my favorite cards in the set. I hope this information helps you get those trophies. Remember to hit like and subscribe for more No Rares required content. We have 7 weeks left until the next set, Wilds of Eldraine, comes to Arena September 5th, and 6 more archetypes to cover, so I'm right on track. If you have a specific archetype that you'd like me to cover next, let me know in the comments below. Happy trophy hunting, and I'll see you all next week.